Welcome to the King Institute for Faith and Culture, such as it is this fall in our strange circumstances. I'm delighted to have many of you here today, although spaced out and masked. I appreciate your coming out to support Mason this morning. The King Student Lectures are an old tradition. They go back to 1960, and we have held for many years these two annual events at which students get to show off their learning, their abilities, their faith, their thoughts about the world, and this morning is yet another addition to that proud tradition. So to introduce Mason, I'm going to hand it over to Han in a moment. We do have two more of these this fall, and for those of you joining us by webcast or YouTube as well, we have one coming up in 2 weeks. This will be faculty lecturer Jody Helbert, and then 4 weeks from today on November the 2nd, Allison Pettix. So we have two more of these coming up this fall. Thank you for being here, and here's Dr. Ong.
Good morning. This is the largest crowd we've had this year for any event related to the King Institute of Faith and Culture, so I'm sure our speaker today really appreciates your presence, your physical presence and your remote presence as well. It is my pleasure to introduce to you, I think, one of the good guys here on the King's campus, Mason McCreary. I first met Mason when he was enrolled in my developmental biology course, and it was during a pivotal moment in his life. He was wavering between several disciplines, and he wasn't quite sure what he wanted to major in at that point. So I seized upon that moment. I was predatory in that way, and I gave him the hard sell. And so here he is today, a biology and Spanish double major, and planning to graduate this coming spring. Mason is from Cedar Park, Texas. He tells people that he's from Austin because people don't know Texas geography that well, but he's actually from Cedar Park, Texas, and a graduate from Vista Ridge High School. He has been an avid volleyball player since he was in the 8th grade and is currently a libero and a serve specialist here at King. This past summer, he was a summer research fellow with the University of Arkansas Medical Sciences, and he conducted his research in the Cancer Institute over there. He will pursue this life of research further as he plans to attend graduate school in the biomedical sciences when he graduates from King this spring. Family is very important to Mason, and in fact, I think most of you in this room, if you know him well, and I think you do, you will likely hear a lot about him talking about how his older sisters have been inspirations in his life. Both of his sisters are physical therapists, and he is very, very comfortable in following the trail of scientific achievements that his sister has blazed for him. So for his sisters who are probably joining us remotely, I would like to thank Kayla and Chandler for inspiring your brother and into being the student and the man he is today. It is very difficult, I think, probably very difficult for us to find a person on this campus as or more likable than our speaker today. So please help me welcome Mason McCreary.
Can y'all hear me okay? Thank you, Dr. Ong, for that introduction. And thank you to Professor Dodderwyk and to Ivy for making this lecture series happen and for getting creative, as we have all had to get creative during this pandemic. And thank you, everyone, for coming out today, and to everyone watching online. Mom, Dad, hi. And just thank you in general to the King community for just pouring into me over the past 3.5 years. I have changed in so many ways over that time, but what comes to mind is that Mason, 3.5 years ago, would have been markedly more terrified to be speaking here today than I am even now. And that relative confidence, at least, is largely thanks to you all. You all, time and time again, have seen something in me that I haven't necessarily sometimes, and you have therefore demanded the best from me and pushed me to do things outside of my comfort zone. So for that, I'm very thankful. I am humbled and honored to be speaking here today, and honestly a little bit surprised. I know that at least the biology professors have to be tired of me walking into their offices 5 times a day and asking a million questions and speaking in 20 hypotheticals and never deciding where I'm going to apply to grad school and just talking their ear off. So the fact that you want to hear me talk more means a lot. The title of my talk today is Bricks and Trampolines, Reconciling Creation, Evolution, and the Pursuit of Science. But while I have you trapped here, I'm obviously going to tell you a little bit about myself. If you talk to me for more than 30 seconds, you have probably deduced that I'm from Austin, or at least from Texas. I fell in love with volleyball at a young age, which admittedly was hard in a state that is dominated by football, but I made my way through it, made it work, and volleyball took me to King, where I am double majoring in human biology and Spanish, where I am serving as a resident assistant, where I am performing research on nematodes and doing a million other things that I never pictured myself doing. And again, that is largely thanks to the help of you all. The last 6 months have taught me of the fickleness of the plans that humans can create on their own, but the plan is to pursue a doctorate degree in the biomedical sciences upon graduation. I don't know how well you can see this, but this photo was taken circa 2014 when thick, heavily vignetted filters were still in fashion on Instagram, but I grew up a Christian and I always felt God's presence most tangibly when I was outside and in creation. I have therefore always been interested in life on Earth and the processes that drive it. But growing up Christian, I perceived that being Christian came with it a set of appearances, mannerisms, ideologies, and beliefs about the world that you should adhere to as a good Christian. And I don't know how well you can see this image. It basically says that Christian voters tend to be Republican, but I don't wish to stir the political pot. All I want to do here is illustrate that as a Christian, it is easy to believe that you are supposed to fit into a mold that is not defined spiritually. When I ask you to think of a church-going man or woman, it is likely that a specific appearance, race, socioeconomic status, or political party all comes to mind. And I don't wish to say that this archetype is inherently true or representative, but it is our perception, and that perception is not really unwarranted. I also don't intend to dilute the demands that God makes of you, because if you ask me, what does God require of you? I could be up here for days. But in essence, the answer is pretty well summed up in Micah 6:8. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. This is what God expects from you, not to carry yourself in a certain way within our understanding of culture or of sacraments or within beliefs about the world that the church has, simply because they are beliefs that the church has. One of those beliefs, put simply, is that God created... Does my mic just go out? Can you hear me on this one? Okay. One of those beliefs, put simply, is that God created Earth and the life on it. In recent history, this has been viewed as the antithesis to evolutionary theory. This dichotomy has been most visible within our education system. In 1925, a Tennessee public teacher was convicted and charged of teaching evolution in the classroom. But in 1999, a federal court ruled as unconstitutional Louisiana's practice of simply asking students to question evolutionary theory. So there has really been this remarkable change over the past 100 years, not only within the education system, but in our culture as a whole. So where there was, in the early to mid 20th century, this very loud conflict, outspoken conflict between many aspects of biblical thought and modern science, there is now kind of just this silent divorce between creationism and evolutionary theory. When you talk about creationism and evolutionary theory, that's the thing, is you aren't talking about creationism and evolutionary theory. You are talking about one or the other, or at least that has been my experience. And this is a problem because our knowledge of evolution is informed by the scientific process. So, in a way, this separation between the church and evolution is extended not only to evolution, but to science in general. It's kind of like God and science had a nasty divorce over how to handle their son, evolution. And this proposes a real dilemma for Christian scientists such as myself, because at worst, it makes you feel like you have to pick between either being a scientist or fully pursuing God. At best, it prevents Christian scientists from viewing or using their science as a ministry and as a glimpse into how God works. And I know that probably not many of us have views that are either end of this extreme. Most of us are probably somewhere in the middle of this continuum from creation to evolution, because it is a continuum. Some of us probably hold ideas from both. But I want to use evolution as an example to illustrate how we respond when scientific or historical evidence challenges what we think we know about the world. Now, before you dismiss me as either a heretic or a Jesus freak, I want to lay some common ground. You have faith. This is not a conversation between the faithful and the faithless. Every belief on that continuum is built on faith in some type of belief system. This is also not a debate between the open and the closed-minded. After all, a central tenet of Christianity is that there is more to life than what we can measure or observe. That is pretty open-minded, or at least it should be. I want to illustrate what is happening by using an analogy that was first used by Rob Bell in his book Velvet Elvis. Rob Bell bought a trampoline for his family, and soon after he bought it, his 5-year-old son discovered that the better he synchronized his jumping with the jumping of his father, the higher he could go. And so it is in our relationship with Jesus. When you purposefully model your life after the way of Jesus, the more in sync you are with the inner workings of the universe at their deepest levels. After all, Jesus said, "If you have seen me, you have seen the Father." And the Father is the ultimate reality. So, the better in sync you are, the higher you can go. And to jump, it really helps if we have springs. Springs, as you can see here, are statements and beliefs about our faith in God. They help give words to our experience of jumping, but they are not a means to an end. They really have no use by themselves. They serve no purpose on their own. The springs aren't God, and I'm pretty sure that God can jump as high as he wants to without the help of springs. Let's take the Trinity for an example. The concept of God being 3 in 1 is essential in the Christian faith, and it helps us understand who God is and how he works. But this usefulness of the concept of the Trinity isn't God. The springs, as I have said, are words that we use to talk about our faith. But words aren't absolute. That's why words change meaning and go in and out of style over time. But as with the springs, it is the word's flexibility that makes them so effective. The springs are attached firmly to the mat, but it is their flex and their stretch that allows us to jump. But the springs aren't God. For some people, all of these secondary beliefs are not springs, but bricks. Each doctrine is a brick, one stacked on top of another, and if you pull one out, the whole wall is in danger of falling. The wall looks strong, but if you remove the brick of six-day creation, you start getting a little bit nervous. But if the whole faith falls apart because you examine one brick or one spring, was the faith ever really that strong? When we make a brick wall, the wall is the sum total of all these beliefs, and God is as big as the wall. But God, obviously, is bigger than any belief or worldview or religion. The depth of the Lord's glory is beyond any brick or spring that we can create using the human language. Moses, at one point, asks the Lord, "Can you please show me your glory?" The Lord says that he will cover Moses with his hand, and that when he takes away his hand, Moses will see the Lord's back. Many ancient rabbis argued that the word back should be understood as where I just was. It's as if God is saying, the closest you will ever get to fully understanding me is to observe where I just was. And because God is so infinite and not really fully understandable, it is okay to have questions about his nature. If you wait to follow the Lord until you have all your questions about him answered, you will be waiting for a very long time, because we all have questions about God. What changes is whether or not we are willing to grapple with those questions. A question, no matter how seemingly blasphemous, acknowledges that the person asking the question does not have all the answers. A question acknowledges the infinitude of God more than defending a brick wall, because questions are rooted in humility. So, what if I was pondering the book of Genesis, and I saw that the sun and the moon were created to separate day and night on day 4, but each day prior is already marked by the passing of an evening and a morning? What if I learned that Yom, or the Hebrew word for day in Genesis, has also been translated into the words time, year, age, and several other generally time-related concepts within the Bible, including other places in Genesis? What if I learned that there is overwhelming genetic, archaeological, and morphological evidence to suggest that all species are related and arise slowly over time? What if we really had questions about this? Would you defend your brick wall, or would you jump with me and ask these questions in the freedom of knowing that asking them does not change anything about God's ultimate sovereignty? It is natural to ask these questions because truth will always lead us to have questions, because truth is insight into God, and God is infinite and boundless. What is so beautiful about science is that if we allow it, it can also lead us to truths about the nature of God. We are able to do this because God created, but he created a world that was separate from himself, that can therefore be investigated. This is very different from most ancient cultures in which their gods were enmeshed in the world. They were inseparable from creation. For example, the Canaanite god Baal was the god of thunder and storm. If you were hearing lightning or thunder, you were hearing Baal. Their god was enmeshed in the world. But our God does not become creation. He does not emanate from creation. Our God is not creation. But God's logic is built into the universe. I'm paraphrasing, but in Jeremiah 33, the Lord says that his universal laws, or the ordinances of heaven and earth, are as sure as the promises that he makes to his covenant people. To be a scientist is not to attribute God's work to something else, but to tease apart the miraculous intricacies of his natural law that he established. So when I say that lightning is caused by electrical imbalances between storm clouds and the ground, I am not discrediting God's hand in the lightning. I'm actually getting a closer look into the way that he works. And the scientific explanation also should not demystify anything about the process that is happening. There's still something very elegant in the way that this is being carried out. It is actually more glorifying to God to tease apart these intricacies of lightning and marvel at how it is carried out within his natural law than it is to just see lightning and vaguely say, that's God. When we discover that cadherins are an essential molecule in cell-to-cell adhesion that hold your cells together, we are graced with observing a manifestation of Colossians 1:17. In him, all things hold together. In the same way, when science leads me to believe that God does not fashion life ex nihilo, or out of nothing, I am not saying that his work is any less marvelous, or that we are any less special. If anything, I am blown away that the natural laws that he established allow for so much freedom and creativity and allow for so much diversity. We must also remember that the original point of creation is for things to work for his glory. Revelations 4:11 states that you are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for you have created all things, and for your pleasure they were and are created. I think this motivation for creation is the reason for an often overlooked nuance of Genesis. As God created, at the end of the third, fourth, and fifth days, he saw what he had made, and he said that it was good. But at the end of the sixth day, when God saw all of his creation all together, he said that it was very good. This is because God is most glorified when his creation works in unison as it is supposed to work. He is most glorified when his creation works in shalom. Shalom has been defined as the webbing together of God, humans, and creation, all of creation, in justice, fulfillment, and delight. And to put it as eloquently as possible, the overall concept of evolution seems pretty shalomy. Evolution, after all, describes the interconnectedness between all of creation. When you look at evolutionary relationships on a micro scale, the relationships are pretty easily traceable. So one bird with this beak type became all these different birds with these different beak types, depending on the demands of the environment. God's natural laws are pretty observable at this level of analysis. But when you look at evolution on a macro scale, all we can really say about it is that millions of these sequential small things happened over and over again that eventually led to us. God's natural law, in this perspective, was successfully carried out billions and billions of times in order to get to us. This isn't to say that we weren't intentional. This is to say that the small ways in which God's natural law works all leads to a greater purpose for his glorification. That is shalom. But just as we must be humble about how much we can actually know about the Lord, we must also be humble about what science can and cannot do. Science attempts to seek out the mechanisms of natural law, but by its nature, it cannot discount the presence of the supernatural. The black swan effect in science says that one counter-observation to a law or theory means that we must rethink what we know about said law or theory. And there are plenty of ways in which God counters scientific law through miracles, healings, you name it. Even if you do not believe in God, there are so many things that happen on earth that you just simply can't explain with science. So, if you pursue science and you try to find ways to explain every phenomenon scientifically without acknowledging some type of external force that can work outside of scientific law, you will be searching for an eternity. So, science cannot disprove the presence of God. Creationists and scientists alike find peace in that. The point of science, from a faith standpoint, is to supplement what we already know about him. Science and the knowledge and wisdom that it takes to pursue science are gifts from God that allow us to see how he works. Science is a gift from God, and it would be a shame to put that to waste. So, let's start viewing science as a tool to figure out how he works. And when the intersection between science and faith begins to make us feel uncomfortable, let's welcome both with open arms and move forward in earnest, knowing that nothing changes about God's ultimate sovereignty. Again, I am not here to advocate any position other than to say that maybe all of our evidence points towards the same thing. So, when you are asked the hard questions, when you feel like you are backed up against a wall, when you feel yourself pulled in every which way by our very deeply polarizing society, will you defend your wall, or will you consider laying down your bricks and jumping with me? Thank you.
It is my honor and pleasure to present Mason this first ornament for his future office. This is the plaque given by the King Institute of Faith and Culture to Mason McCreary, our first student lecturer for this year. Thank you. As Martin will always say, you're dismissed. Thank you.